Welcome back, colleagues, advanced practitioners, and clinical researchers, to this comprehensive individual remedy study within our Masterclass series. Today, we are opening the definitive case file on Centaury. While our previous exploration of agrimony exposed a psychological defense mechanism built on an active, calculated defensive social smile, Centauri introduces us to a far more passive structural vulnerability within the human psyche. This remedy targets a profound systemic collapse of the personal will. It is the definitive study of the human soul that has completely forgotten how to defend its own borders. In this lecture, we will trace the trajectory of the constitutional willing servant who has slid into the pathologically destructive role of the systemic doormat. We will dissect the exact energetic architecture of Group 5, explore the striking physical imprints left on the skeletal and vascular systems, look deeply into the codependency traps of enablement and establish the precise clinical frameworks required to trigger the sovereign awakening of the human ego. Let us begin. To truly comprehend Centauri at an advanced clinical tier, we must co-textualize its placement within Group 5, oversensitivity to influences and ideas. As we discussed in our last module, all remedies within Group 5 share a naturally porous aura. They possess an exceptional sensitivity to environmental pressures, emotional undercurrents, and interpersonal demands. However, look closely at the structural divergence between our first two remedies. When an agrimony individual experiences an environmental threat, a conflict, or a tense family argument, their ego defense system panics and builds a noisy, active deflection shield out of jokes, changing the subject, and social cheerfulness. The Centauri individual possesses no such shield. When psychological or emotional pressure hits their field, their ego defense system simply collapses inward. Instead of fighting, fleeing, or deflecting, they choose immediate, absolute submission. They shrink their personal footprint, erase their needs, and lower their borders to zero. They do this because, at an instinctual level, they believe that the only way to remain safe, loved, and unattacked in an adversarial world is to become completely useful and unthreatening to those who hold power around them. Let us analyze the exact mechanics of this boundary layer. The negative Centauri state is defined by what we term the open border. When a dominant personality walks into the room, be it an aggressive spouse, a demanding boss, or a needy relative, the Centauri individual does not evaluate the incoming demand critically. Their energetic system automatically absorbs the expectation, transforming it instantly into an absolute internal obligation. This triggers a systemic process of ego minimalization. To prevent any possible confrontation or disapproval, they reduce their own desires, hobbies, financial goals, and health requirements until they are completely invisible. This creates a state of psychic parasitism because They radiate an aura of absolute compliance. They become an irresistible target for more aggressive, dominating personalities. They become energetic satellites, exhausting their own vital reserves to power the ego complexes, ambitions, and daily confronts of the predators who surround them. Let us anchor our diagnostic criteria in the text of the Master himself. In the 12 Healers and Other Remedies of 1936, Dr. Edward Bach defined the Centauri profile with profound clinical clarity. He described them as kind, quiet, gentle people who are over anxious to serve others. They overtax their strength in their endeavors. Notice how Batch immediately highlights the connection to physical depletion. They overtax their strength. This is not a casual desire to help. It's an anxiety-driven compulsion to overserve. Batch goes on to warn their wish grows upon them until they become more servants than willing helpers. This line contains the entire evolutionary movement of the pathology. What begins as a beautiful soul level virtue of genuine kindness and devotion is gradually corrupted by fear until the individual loses their free will entirely, degenerating into a psychological slave who is incapable of saying no to any external force. When a negative Centauri patient presents in your consultation room, they present with highly visible diagnostic markers. The most prominent is the missing no. They have an absolute, almost physical inhibition when it comes to vocalizing a boundary. If you ask them to take on an extra unreasonable task, or if you inquire why they allowed a relative to drain their bank account, they will stammer, freeze, and look down. Furthermore, they function as the chameleon pleaser. If they are in a room with a person holding strong political, medical, or domestic opinions, they will automatically nod and echo those exact opinions. Not because they genuinely agree, but because their system cannot tolerate the energetic friction of holding an independent stance. This leads to chronic resignation. They take on extra workloads, work weekends, and accept toxic behavior completely silently, burying their extreme operational fatigue under a quiet, submissive nod. As advanced practitioners, we must always cross-reference human psychology with the morphology of the living plant. Look at Centaurum. It's a small, exceptionally delicate plant that produces beautiful pale pink star-shaped blossoms. It looks radiant, pure, and spiritually refined. However, examine its physical structure. The stem is remarkably thin, brittle, and completely lacks structural rigidity. In its natural habitat, Centauri rarely grows in open, independent fields. It's almost always found growing directly inside thick, dense, coarse patches of taller weeds and grasses. It uses the physical bulk of the surrounding coarse plants to prop itself up. If you clear away the surrounding weeds, the Centauri plant will frequently lean over or collapse under a strong gust of wind because it lacks an independent structural spine. This is the exact botanical signature of our patient, a beautiful, pure, star-like soul that lacks the internal vertical column necessary to stand erect against the harsh currents of life without learning on a dominant partner. Because the Centauri patient systematically suppresses their personal will, their physical body is forced to bear the structural consequences of that erasure. Remember the core law of holistic medicine. What is surrendered in the psychic realm must be somaticized in the physical tissues. If a patient spends decades treating themselves like an energetic doormat, their anatomy will change to reflect that exact role. As clinicians, we must train ourselves to execute a comprehensive nonverbal scan the moment a patient walks towards the presentation chair. In this next segment, we will analyze the precise somatic markers of the erased ego, focusing heavily on vascular collapse, postural deficits, and immune porosity. Let us map out the three primary somatic markers of the negative Centauri state. First is vascular collapse, typically presenting as chronic severe hypotension, poor peripheral circulation, cold extremities, and a striking bloodless paleness under the eyes. In classical homeopathy, this maps directly to anemic states. The vital fire and iron in the blood are dangerously low because the patient has bled out their life force to others. Second is the postural deficit. These patients present with distinct rounded shoulders, an exaggerated thoracic kyphosis, and a weak, slouched spine. They look physically bent over, embodying the posture of a literal servant who is permanently weighed down by the heavy emotional baggage of their family matrix. Third is porous immunity. Because their energetic aura has no defined border, their biological defense system mimics this defect. They suffer from chronic, recurrent, opportunistic infections, catching every single virus or bacteria that passes through their workplace or home. We come now to an essential chapter in clinical practice, the relationship between Centauri and the architecture of addiction. It's vital to separate this remedy from agrimony. An agrimony individual turns to alcohol or sedatives to achieve anesthesia from their own internal mental torture. A Centauri individual, however, takes a completely different path into dependency. They are the archetypal enabler. They rarely initiate heavy substance use for their own pleasure. Instead, they consume stimulants to push past their physical exhaustion so they can keep completing the course of an addicted partner, or they endure a toxic environment by quietly self medicating to survive an abuser's rage. They act as a human shield for narcissists, sociopaths, and addicts, covering up their crimes, paying their debts, and accepting verbal abuse because their boundary layer is completely missing. In addiction clinics, you cannot heal the primary addict without treating the codependent Centaury partner who is unconsciously structuring the enablement field. To truly understand how these principles function in live therapeutic environments, let us leave behind abstract concepts and step into our clinical case histories. Reviewing real cases allows us to track the exact behavioral changes and healing crises that occur when a patient's primary defense strategy of submissive compliance is systematically dissolved by a vibrational catalyst. We will analyze two distinct clinical profiles: a classic sacrificial domestic caregiver suffering from diagnosed chronic fatigue syndrome and a corporate tech professional trapped in an extreme cycle of professional exploitation and uncompensated labor. Our first case concerns a 54-year-old female who was referred to my clinic with a formal medical diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome and severe fibromyalgia. Upon taking her intake history, her lifestyle reality was staggering. She was managing her entire household, paying for the debts of her two adult children who refused to work, and enduring constant verbal devaluation from an aggressive narcissistic spouse. She did all of this with a soft, apologetic tone, stating, "I just want everyone to be happy, doctor." Her vital reserves were completely spent. I initiated a high frequency protocol of Centauri combined with Olive. By week 4, the energetic change was monumental. She experienced a sudden wave of internal clarity. She sat her adult children down and systematically cut off their financial allowances, giving them 30 days to secure employment. She then turned to her spouse and calmly stated that she would no longer tolerate devaluing speech. Her chronic fatigue and body pain vanished completely by month 3 because she finally plugged the energetic holes in her aura. Our second case involves a 28-year-old junior software developer who presented with acute anxiety, insomnia, and recurring chest tightness. This young man was the classic office doormat. He was routinely logging 80-hour work weeks, completing the technical assignments of his entire team, while his senior colleagues took all the credit and bonuses. He was terrified of being fired. despite being the most vital technical asset in the firm. He could not say no to any request. I prescribed Centaury as a standalone remedy. The therapeutic progression was a textbook example of boundary restoration. Within 20 days, his supervisor walked to his desk on Friday afternoon and dumped another project for the weekend. For the first time in his career, the developer looked up, maintained calm eye contact, and said, I will not be working this weekend. I will review this on Monday morning. The supervisor was shocked but immediately compiled. The patient's insomnia vanished that very night because he had finally reclaimed his inner vertical pillar. To track your patient's evolution through long-term treatment structures, utilize this clinical progression matrix. We analyze progress across three precise vectors. First is boundary command. At baseline, the patient displays automatic compliance and an apologetic, shrinking physical posture. Post-remedy, this evolves into a calm, effortless, and non-negotiable verbal no. Second is energy retention. Their baseline state is total drainage and constant exploitation by psychic parasites. Post-remedy, they manifest a tight, strong, energetic containment layer. Third is their sense of mission. At baseline, they are trapped living out other people's scripts and desires. Post-remedy, they achieve the independent, sovereign execution of their own self-will and life destiny. True clinical precision separates the master practitioner from the amateur. Anyone can see a weak-willed person and randomly assign a remedy, but we must execute a rigorous differential analysis to identify the exact energetic layer that is compromised. If you misdiagnose a patient's core motivator, your remedy will slide off their energetic field without effect. In this next segment, we will contrast Centaury against its primary correlates in the classical homeopathic and batch systems, specifically Staphysagria, chicory, pulsatilla, and Cilicia. Learning to read the subtle behavioral clues that differentiate these powerful archetypes. Let us address the most common confusion in integrated practice. Centaury versus the heavy classical homeopathic polycrest, Staphysagria. On the surface, both profiles appear identical. They are both exploited, they both accept abusive behavior, and they both fail to stand up for themselves. But look at their internal chemistry. Centaury operates on pure weakness of will. There is no hidden anger or toxic resentment inside the negative Centauri soul. They yield out of a genuine, albeit completely misplaced, desire to be useful and preserve peace. Homeopathic staphysagria, however, is a pressure cooker of suppressed indignation. Every time a Staphysagria patient yields to an abuser, they are internally burning with intense toxic rage, shame, and resentment. They suppress it out of a fear of consequences, but it rots their interior. Centauri needs strength of will. Staphysagria needs the safe release of suppressed rage. Now, let us perform a critical intra-system comparison. Centauri versus Chicory. This is the definitive study of the relationship between the prey and the predator within a family matrix. The negative Centauri type gives unconditionally until they are physically destroyed. They ask for absolutely nothing in return, nor they look for praise, they simply obey. The Chicory archetype, conversely, is a master of conditional giving. Chicory gives heavily, cooks, serves, and provides care, but always with invisible emotional strings attached. They use their service as a psychological leverage to control, manipulate, and dominate the lives of their family members. In a toxic domestic system, a dominating Shikori mother will frequently select her weakest Centauri child to be her permanent housebound servant, using guilt to keep the child's will entirely locked in place. To further sharpen your intake accuracy, look at this compliance focus matrix. We compare how three distinct constitutional profiles handle submission. Look first at pulsatilla. Their core driver for submission is an absolute terrifying fear of abandonment or loss of love. Their internal state during compliance is whipping, clingy, and highly manipulative sweetness. They yield specifically so you will hug them and tell them they are loved. Next, look at Cilicia. Their submission is purely apparent. A Cilicia patient will yield to an aggressive speaker on the outside to preserve their delicate physical energy, but internally they retain their rigid, unshakable private opinions. Finally, look at Centauri. Their submission is absolute and structural. They do not cling like Pulsatilla, nor do they hide a secret opinion like Cilicia. Their own ego requirements simply blank out entirely the moment an external command hits their field. As clinical instructors and modern digital content creators, you must understand that the human ego loves to hide its own weaknesses. A Centauri patient will routinely look you in the eye and claim that their workaholism or caregiving is just proof of their good heart or spiritual devotion. They wrap up their weakness in the banner of virtue. To slice through this rationalism, we must deploy structured interactive assessment tools. By introducing the three-question boundary test, we force the patient or viewer to confront their real-world behavioral loops, bypassing their intellectual self-conceptions and exposing the true structural condition of their aura's boundary layer. Question 1. Do you find yourself saying yes to extra professional assignments or family demands while your physical body is literally trembling with exhaustion? This exposes the split between natural physical warnings and a pathologically compliant mind. Question number 2. Do you routinely vocalize an immediate "I am so sorry" when another person clumsily bumps into you in a public corridor or store? This is the hallmark indicator of an ego that defaults to taking the blame for environmental friction. Question number 3. Do you automatically and unconsciously mirror the tone of voice, political stances, or opinions of whoever you are currently speaking with? This tracks the presence of chameleon pleasing. If they score yes on two or more, the sovereign boundaries are severely compromised. We move now from diagnosis to the real world operational therapeutics of our masterclass. Understanding the psychology of a broken will is meaningless if you cannot formulate a precise strategic prescription to rebuild it. In this next section, we will detail the advanced clinical implementation of Centaury. We will map out targeted sovereign formulations for complex multi-remedy layers, analyze the dangerous mechanics of boundary backlash, backlash crisis, establish advanced priming dosage rhythms, and provide the traditional Sun method manufacturing blueprint for production independence. In advanced clinical presentations, Centauri must be layered with complementary essences to address the multi-layered defenses of the patient. Let us master three highly effective sovereign trios. First is the abuse armor. Centaury paired with walnut and holy. This is mandatory for active domestic violence or narcissistic abuse cases. Centaury restores the will, walnut breaks the mesmerizing, spellbinding links to the abuser, and holy shields the porous aura from absorbing the abuser's toxic projections. Second is the vital engine. Centaury layered with olive and larch. This addresses the severe physical fatigue of the office doormat, where olive recharges the flat cellular battery, Centaury anchors the border, and larch gives them the confidence to project their true professional value. Third is the boundary anchor. Centaury combined with Serato and Pine. This targets the patient who wants to say no, but is paralyzed by guilt, spine eradicates the irrational guilt of setting boundaries, while Serato stops them from constantly seeking external validation for their decisions. As clinical practitioners, you must prepare your patient for what I term the boundary backlash crisis. This typically manifests between week 2 and 4 of a successful Centaury protocol. Look at this systematic flowchart. When a doormat suddenly stands up and transforms into a sovereign human being, the surrounding domestic or professional ecosystem experiences immediate panic. The aggressive spouse, the lazy adult children, or the exploitative manager will not celebrate this healing. They will lash out, escalating their manipulation, using heavy guilt, or staging anger storms to force the patient back into their old role of submissive compliance. You must provide intense psychological scaffolding during this window. Educate your patient before they take their first dose that this backlash is the ultimate proof that the remedy is working. The system is reacting because their old doormat is no longer available for use. For chronic constitutional cases where the personal will has been flatlined since early childhood, our standard protocol requires an initial priming rhythm of 6 drops taken 4 times daily for the first 7 days of treatment. This higher initial dose provides the heavy kinetic push needed to break through decades of behavioral stagnation. Furthermore, teach your patient to use the remedy tactically. Instruct them to administer an acute dose of 4 drops directly on the tongue 10 minutes prior to any high stress interpersonal encounter, such as walking into a corporate performance review, entering a difficult family holiday gathering, or confronting a dominant ex-partner. For patients presenting with severe localized physical depletion in the solar plexus region, the remedy can also be massaged topically directly onto the skin over the stomach area to accelerate mucosal and energetic integration. As we approach the final movement of our masterclass, we must expand our clinical horizon past physical postures, immune markers, and dosage algorithms to focus on the ultimate spiritual arc of the Centauri journey. We must never minimize flower essences as simple green tools for anxiety management or behavioral modification. They are advanced evolutionary tools designed for soul transformation. The true purpose of Centauri is not to make a patient loud, aggressive, or combative. Its purpose is to guide the human ego through its evolutionary arc, transforming a life of fearful, blind, and exhausting human subjugation into a life of sacred, free-willed, and divinely aligned devotional choice. To anchor this spiritual arc, let us meditate on the radical words written by Dr. Bach in his 1932 masterwork, Free Thyself. He wrote, we must learn to develop our own individuality and freedom to serve only our own soul command and never allow ourselves to be dominated by another. Look closely at his phrasing to serve only our own soul command. This cuts to the absolute core of the pathology. The negative Centauri state is actually actually a form of spiritual cowardice. The individual obeys a human master because they are too terrified to take responsibility for standing up and executing the commands of their own higher soul. True healing returns only when the human personality realizes that its ultimate duty is to the divine spark within, never to the manipulative expectations of a human predator. When the human soul integrates the vibrational frequency of Centauri, it unblocks three magnificent consecrated virtues. First is sovereign autonomy. The human ego transforms into a clean, vertical channel of absolute light, executing its true higher mission without checking to see if the environment approves of its direction. Second is spiritual discrimination. The patient develops an instantaneous intuitive capacity to separate true divine service from human exploitation. They can see right through a guilt trip in real time, smiling at a manipulator while remaining completely unmoved. Third is active power. The volcanic vital force that was previously bled out through 1,000 energetic leaks to parasites is suddenly contained, filling the physical body with radiant, youthful vitality, posture, and immunity. To ensure you can execute these protocols with absolute confidence in your clinical practice, tomorrow morning, let us synthesize our intake roadmap into two formalized steps. Step 1 is the will scan. Train your ear to listen completely past the patient's spoken stories. Analyze their linguistic architecture for chronic self-deprecation, a default use of apologies, and an instinctual tendency to claim everything is fine while their body stouches. Step 2 is Systemic mapping. Map out their domestic and professional networks. Identify the precise predator, the active vine or chicory archetype, currently draining your patient's energetic pool. This standardized, systematic intake roadmap ensures your clinic delivers reproducible, safe, and world-class holistic results. We have mapped an extraordinary clinical and evolutionary landscape today, moving from the thin brittle stem of the wild Centaurum blossom to the structural reclamation of the sovereign human will. I want to express my deepest gratitude to each of you for your unwavering focus, academic dedication, and passion for medical excellence. I now open our floor to your clinical questions, active case files, and peer discussions. For our global community participating online, please drop your insights into the comment section below. Have you spotted the Centauri doormat loop in your current caseload or perhaps in your own personal history? How did your patient navigate the boundary backlash crisis? Let us cross-reference our data to elevate the practice of natural medicine worldwide. You can access my direct clinical intake and consultation portal through the link provided below. Before we separate today and return to our active clinical environments, we will formally review our institutional and administrative disclaimers. The advanced clinical strategies, botanical signature analysis, formulations, and case progressions compiled throughout this masterclass are designed strictly for professional educational research and multidisciplinary validation. This material does not substitute for formal licensed conventional medical treatments, emergency psychiatric interventions, or authorized domestic abuse counseling. Practitioners must maintain absolute professional boundaries, exercising independent clinical judgment within their local legal scope of practice and consulting with a patient's primary healthcare team before modifying any established medical or therapeutic regimes.